I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Friday, March 22nd. We begin in Ottawa, where the president of the Nunatukavut Community Council, or NCC, was in federal court yesterday to defend their MOU with the federal government. And at a press conference, NCC President Todd Russell claimed the council represents about 6,000 Inuit in southern Labrador. The NCC signed their memorandum of understanding with the feds back in 2019 for the purpose of entering discussions regarding rights recognition and self-determination. It also references a land claim submission, one which overlaps portions of Innu territory. And it was earlier this week when the Inu Nation, together with Indigenous leaders from Labrador and Quebec, publicly declared that NCC members are not Indigenous, asking the federal court to rule against the MOU. Russell says those allegations are false and an example of what he calls lateral violence.
It is particularly egregious when we hear such misinformation come from members of our own family, our relatives. Nunatukavut Inuit have occupied and had a special relationship with the land, the ice and waters of our territory long before the arrival of Europeans.
To Winnipeg, where the Southern Chiefs Organization recently hosted a First Nations health gathering. With more on what was discussed, Sierra Bettens.
In Winnipeg, hundreds gathered to discuss Indigenous health transformation at a Southern Chiefs Organization conference. One of the panels of the two-day conference focused on decolonizing mental health. A cross-section of experts agree colonialism has caused serious mental health issues among Indigenous people, issues like violence and suicide.
That colonization process is one that's ongoing. Ever since that mind was developed, it's ongoing to this very day.
Ed Connors is a psychologist from Kahnawake Mohawk Territory. He works with Indigenous youth on suicide prevention and life promotion.
The youth basically were saying to us, we're losing our culture, we're losing our ways, we're losing our teachings, we're losing our languages. And as we do that, we basically don't know, in essence, where we've come from. We don't know who we are.
Albert McLeod, a longtime human rights activist, spoke about the mental health of 2S LGBTQ+ individuals. He believes the homophobia and transphobia they experience is connected to colonialism.
I think fear in colonization, fear of loss of control by colonizers in the 21st century is really driving this anti-trans, anti-2S LGBTQ movement, and it's nostalgia for the past, and we can't go backward in our society. We can only go forward as a democratic society.
A 2023 report by the Trevor Project on mental health and well-being of Indigenous LGBTQ young people in the United States found that over half of Indigenous 2S LGBTQ+ youth reported seriously considering suicide in the past year. Nearly a quarter attempted suicide. New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have implemented policies restricting gender expression in schools for trans and gender-diverse youth. McLeod says there are ways to promote inclusion of Indigenous and Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ people within policymaking.
Create Two-Spirit-specific governance models like councils that guide and advise and have, opportunities to promote policy, to promote, local legislation, and just their ideas about health and healing and wellness and employment as well.
He adds that he values how forward-looking the conference is.
It's about reconciliation and decolonizing health. And, as Indigenous people across the Americas, we've done that for generations. Now it's time to actualize it and live it and experience it as we move into the future.
Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To northern Manitoba now, where a man is dead following a house fire on the Barren Lands First Nation. Located some 900 kilometers north of Winnipeg, the closest service center to the Cree community is 320 kilometers away in Thompson. And it was Thompson RCMP who received a report of the house fire at 11:15 Tuesday night. They were told 3 people were inside, none of them accounted for. Local fire department staff were able to enter the home around 3:30 Wednesday morning. A lone male was pronounced dead. The cause of the fire is under investigation. It's the second fatal fire to hit Barren Lands this year. In other news, years of delays and multiple cost overruns later, it now appears the expansion of the federally owned Trans Mountain Pipeline is very nearly done. The final price tag said to be about $34 billion, a far cry from the $4.5 billion paid for it by the feds back in 2018, when costs to complete it were estimated at around $7.4 billion. Once in operation, the expanded pipeline is expected to move 890,000 barrels of bitumen a day, nearly tripling the capacity of the current pipeline. Sourced from Alberta, the BC-bound bitumen will then be shipped via oil tanker to international markets. Final testing is ongoing, with full operations slotted for July 1st. The 2024 Arctic Winter Games have now concluded, and while it was a happy time for many, one athlete has openly shared her frustration at not getting to compete for Team Yukon. Sarah Connors explains.
It just really opened my eyes to how wrong this whole situation can be and is.
The Arctic Winter Games just wrapped up in Matsu, Alaska. Dene Games athlete Robin McLeod hoped to be there, but was forced to stay back. The Klecho Dene athlete is no stranger to the Arctic Winter Games. She previously competed in the Dene Games division and was excited to learn this year's games would include an open category for women over 18.
You know, I have a lot of knowledge about these games, and I love these games.
The 38-year-old mom of two lives in Ross River, a 5-hour drive from Whitehorse where practices are held. McLeod says she struggled to attend practices because of the distance, cost, and lack of access to childcare.
They told me that they wanted me to be at 70% of the practices. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, I don't think I can do that. I'm an artist. I'm a low-income, rural, Indigenous woman. You know, like I'm here and I'm a mother. And I'm living 5 hours away from, you know, a city.
In February, she says she was released from the team for not making enough practices. McLeod appealed the decision and wrote an open letter detailing her frustrations to the Aboriginal Sports Circle, the sport governing body for Dene Games. But the organization says it conducted a review and stood by the decision, stating there was a lack of demonstrated commitment to the Dene Games team and the core values of Dene Games on your part.
They needed to, you know, have more sensitivity to caregivers and mothers and parents.
McLeod would like to see the Aboriginal Sports Circle update its policies to be more inclusive for those living outside of Whitehorse.
It feels really bad to know that I'm going to have to continuously fight this battle.
She still plans to try out for the 2026 Games in Whitehorse. The president of the board of directors for the Aboriginal Sports Circle declined to comment on specific athletes, though they did say the matter is now closed. A spokesperson for Yukon government, which provides funding for sport governing bodies, says there are a number of options athletes can access to cover travel expenses, including a territorial travel fund. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
And finally, the second annual Jim Brady Medals of Excellence have now been handed out. Honoring unsung heroes across Canada, the medals take their name from the late Métis activist. An accomplished photographer, veteran, and scholar, James Brady also helped found both the Métis nations of Alberta and Saskatchewan. But in 1967, Brady tragically disappeared, leaving behind 5 children and an impressive legacy. A way to honor his grandfather's generous spirit, the award was co-created by Brady's grandson, John Brady MacDonald, and his aunt. MacDonald says most of the recognition Brady received came after his disappearance, something he doesn't want to see others experience. This year's recipients include Lorna and Eugene Arcand for their work with residential school survivors, as well as Isabella Kulak, whose story inspired the creation of National Ribbon Skirt Day. MacDonald says he wants the medals to celebrate those making the world a better place.
The most important thing is, we want people to understand that what they're doing is having a positive effect and is recognized and is being honored. And it's being honored while they're still here.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Friday, March 22nd. I'm Rick Harp.